Thank you very much for joining us today for this live talk. My name is Matteo, and I've been working with Mercy Corps for just over 2 years now as part of the fundraising team. I want to, first of all, thank you very much for joining this talk. To learn more just about how COVID-19 is affecting people in the Middle East and the work that Mercy Corps is doing there to support communities. These are very difficult times, and the virus has reached people who are not prepared to respond to the devastating impact that it's bringing to their communities. It's threatening people's livelihoods, their health, their education, their economy, and Mercy Corps is working around the clock to make sure that we continue to support them. So before we introduce our guest today, I just want to remind you that you can donate to our COVID-19 Resilience Fund. There's a fund that Mercy Corps has set up recently to make all the amazing work in the regions we work in possible. My colleague Justina, who is here with us today, she will provide the link in the chat box for you to make a donation if you can, and if you haven't already. If you have donated, we've seen a few donations come through. Thank you very much. These were very, very generous. And it's really because of people like you that we can continue working where COVID-19 has hit the most fragile communities. So to help us understand our work in the Middle East, we now welcome Wilf Dinnick. He's our media and communications advisor for the Middle East. He's going to take us through our work in the region over the next 20 minutes or so, probably a bit more, and then we'll pause it there and ask a few questions that you can pop in the chat as we speak, and we're going to have a few answers from Wilf, and we're going to take a few questions with us if we're not able to answer everything. So if we're ready to go, I'm going to pass it to you, Wilf.
Teo, thank you so much. And thanks very much for those who are joining. I appreciate your time. I joined Mercy Corps a couple of years ago, formerly a foreign correspondent. I've been in the region in the Middle East 20 years, Middle East correspondent for ABC News, and I ran Al Jazeera Digital for their English programming. So I really love this part of the world and I'm really passionate about it. And I joined Mercy Corps because I really saw an equivalence there of that. When I was doing reporting, I really felt that we were making change by making people aware of the issues going on in the world. And then Mercy Corps is that step further where actually change is happening, and the people on the ground that this team and puts in place, working with communities, really makes, you can see the impact. So really proud to be part of this team. And Matteo, let me take you and everyone here through a quick overview of the region, how it's changed in the last couple of years. And let me say that, I'm not the only one, but most people consider the change happening now to be the most monumental, most important or significant changes in the region, probably in the last 50 to 80 years. So we're going through a massive change in the Middle East, and to have COVID now happen, it's made, as Matteo said, life very difficult, very challenging for many people in this region. Taking a step back, there's two big things at play here. There's the Iran versus Saudi Arabia conflict, and those are proxy wars that are taking places in all the countries where we operate. So that's Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan. It's happening in Palestine. Forces on either side, either making violence and physical contact, making lives difficult for people there, or economic pressure can come in many ways. I think the other thing we have to recognize is, for the first time in several decades, the United States is really pulling back a lot of its direct aid, especially when you see that in Palestine and other places in the region. And there's more regional actors now playing in these locations where we're operating. So it makes it very difficult and increasingly difficult for our teams in real ways. Things like access, getting stuff across borders trying to help people and work with those communities, and not be inhibited or not be have barriers put up in front of us, either because of conflict or certain parties making that difficult. So those two things are making life very difficult on the ground. And then, as Matteo said again, and the reason we're chatting here today is COVID. So the coronavirus has really done one thing, which I've watched, the real impact here for our teams is learning. And I'll get to that in a second in real examples, but it's amazing because Mercy Corps, again, one of the things that really makes this team, these teams unique from other agencies is that we're really focused on working with communities. So when we look at some of the remote education work we do, I've spoke to some of the teachers who we fund or we support who are helping, let's say, refugee children in host community in Jordan. So they may be Syrians who've come here and let's say they have special needs. One of our programs is to help these young Jordanians, students who are now out of school, do remote learning. Of course, these families aren't going to have iPads and fancy computers, so sometimes it's just over WhatsApp and an old computer. So it's sort of back and forth, and the teachers are going back and forth with the parents in the schools trying to figure this all out. So there's a learning on all levels here of Mercy Corps. And I have to say, again, it's made me really proud to be part of this team because you watch how nimble our teams are, responding literally by the hour to what's happening on the ground, to the reality that they're facing, and then providing a solution and still being able to make an impact. So quickly, I said to Matteo earlier that I thought I'd go over 3 countries where we operate in and look at the problems before COVID and where we're facing now and the problems we're facing now. And I would also I'm going to try to make this quick because I really think much more effective use of time is when you ask questions. And note in those questions that obviously I'm not a programmer, I'm not operational on the ground, but my job is to be very aware and talk to all the people who work with us and for us across the region. And so I speak to them usually on a daily basis. So I have a good handle on what's going on. So please come with any question you want. On Syria, we get a lot of questions about this because, of course, you're thinking of all of these refugees who have been forced from their homes over the last 9 years now in the Syrian conflict, and they are ending up in very crowded refugee camps or host communities. Let's take the north of Syria. If you look at the 9 to 10 years, almost 10 years this conflict has gone on, since December 1st, around the Idlib area, more Syrians have been forced into an area, so northern Syria, into small refugee camps, into the smallest areas possible, in the least amount of time, and it appears that they're getting the least amount of help. So you consider that, just how awful this conflict has been over the last 9 years, and consider now in that 9th year, we are facing some of the worst situation for these Syrians. Because you have to think of the situation for many of these people. They've been displaced many, many times. So as a result, they don't have a lot of belongings. They don't have a lot of financial resources. They're really relying on agencies like Mercy Corps to help them with life-saving assistance. So that could be clean water, food, pots to cook in, etc. So one of the things that we've done in the last couple of weeks, or at least since COVID started, is to make sure that we've ramped up the amount of water that we're supplying. So we've tried to go to donors, but we've also tapped into our resources, and we've increased the amount of water that we're delivering to households. So that's, maybe a family in a tent, by 40%. And we want to do this along with additional soaps and cleaning products to make sure, with information, that the families know exactly what they need to do in order to all of us to help curb the spread of this virus. One of the big challenges here, of course, is if we live in cities, we have governments and they're leading the charge with lockdowns or instructions on how collectively we all should work together to stop the spread of the virus. When you're in a refugee camp, there isn't that social structure. We have to rely on families or tribes. And often you can imagine a family of 5 in a tent with little children. It's very hard to isolate yourself and to not be roaming around those camps. So we're really trying to spread as much information as you can see here in this photo. We're trying to share information, make sure the heads of the household understand very clearly what needs to be done. We have soaps and water, as I said, to make sure that we're able to help spread the information about how to make sure that COVID or this virus doesn't spread. We just get a lot of asks, is it spreading? Is it just not underreported? The question, it's very hard to know that. I was speaking to our country director for Syria the other day, and he said that he asked a lot of the local health clinics if they'd seen an increase in complaints of respiratory problems, etc. That really hasn't happened yet. So even on an anecdotal level, we're not seeing it spread widely, but there isn't a lot of testing. And even if we had testing, again, what are we going to do? This virus is only as bad as the healthcare or the health system is weak. And as you can imagine in those camps, it's very weak. Let me just wrap up by saying about Syria, we've put in place a whole bunch of protocols now. So we're working to help prevent the spread. We have social distancing. So if somebody comes to get extra water or food or flour, what have you, we've spread it out like many of the grocery stores or the shops in the West. So you have to be of social distance. Everything is disinfected. And we're sharing information when somebody comes to pick up something or get our help. We share on how to best practices for hygiene for that family and for that person. And we've also offered information if they get symptoms or what to do and what to consider. So we're really trying to help, even though we're not a health humanitarian organization, we're trying to help there and spread the most amount of information we can. And we want that too, because we want to make sure there's no disinformation. That can be really dangerous in a situation like this. And then the other thing we're doing is with our distribution. So we get goods and we're bringing them to people who need them. Usually there's about 10 touch points. So we calculated about 10 different points where people are touching, let's say flour. And we've reduced that to 2 or 3 now. So not only are we disinfecting everything, but we're making sure that fewer people are touching. And then finally, we have protocols in place should there be a widespread, should the virus go widespread in these camps. So we have ways to make sure that we can enter the camp safely and that we're in the host communities where these refugees are who've left Idlib. And again, there's close to 1 million people there, so you can imagine very crowded. How do we make sure that we're still delivering help and we're not making the problem worse? So we have all those processes in place. So great work by the Syria team, responding literally to how things are changing on the ground by the day. And again, I spoke to the country director and some of the folks in Idlib, and the work they're doing is really impressive. And keep in mind that the vast majority of our team are Syrians. They're on the ground. They're the people affected by this. And they're really, they're giving it their all to make sure that their fellow Syrians are being well treated and taken care of. So a huge credit to them on the Mercy Corps team. If we go to Iraq, Iraq is a country close to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in there. As a journalist, I covered a lot of the fighting and the conflict, and the Iraqi people are really amazing, resilient. That is a country that has faced ongoing conflict for literally decades. After the fight against the Islamic State was wound up around 2016, we went in there and we saw one glaring opportunity, and that was 60% of the population is youth. It's under the age of 25. So many of them have been forced from their homes because of conflict. They've had to drop out of school. And so really we're facing in that country a loss, the fear of a lost generation, kids that haven't been able to go to school. One of the great programs Mercy Corps provides is a condensed education program. So let's say you're a young person, you need to finish high school and to fast track to university. We provide, working with the Ministry of Education in Iraq, condensed programming. So that was all working really well. And then of course, COVID happened, and like much of the rest of the world, schools were canceled. More than 1 million young people were sent home packing. And again, as I described in Jordan, not everyone has fancy phones and iPads to work from, so remote education is very hard. Well, our teams are doing 2 things there in Iraq. The first thing they're doing, we're working with the Ministry of Education on their YouTube channel and their state broadcast channel to deliver more effective remote education. So you can watch the television channels on a certain time for your grade, and we're helping making sure that that's effective processes. And as well, we're working with teachers on online platforming, peer-to-peer sharing on training, best practices for remote learning. So again, working with the community to make sure that they're nimble and responding in a timely way to help the people most in need. And again, these are young Iraqis. But you can imagine families that need money, it'd be very easy to drop out and to start working even in a menial job. And we're really pushing young Iraqis to make sure that they make the right choice and try to stay in school, because we know a young, educated Iraq population is a population that will provide a future for the country that is secure, that is just, and that is stable. And one final note on Iraq, you know, you're seeing these, what they're sort of saying, Arab 2.0 spring protests. Those protests are driven mostly by young people across the region. And for young Iraqis, what they're protesting is there's not a lot of job opportunities. They feel that there's corruption, and they want their governments to be more accountable, especially to their generation. They want to chart a course for themselves. And education is a way that really they can make a mark on their society and contribute. So that's something that we really support. And again, the remote education programs shifting very quickly from those condensed classes into remote, either by YouTube or television, or those peer sharing programs for teachers, has been an amazing program to watch unfold in real time, at least from my point of view where I sit. Let me skip over to Jordan. Jordan, it's where I am now. I'm in the capital, Amman, and I've been here for the last 3 years. I used to come here all the time through Jordan because this is the hub for a lot of people to travel to the other parts of the Middle East. Jordan has a huge host. It's a huge host community for Syrians. That, you know, a lot of people know about Azraq, the refugee camp. It's a home to close to 80,000 Syrians for the last 9 years. So it's a city unto itself. And that refugee camp is where most people think the vast majority of Syrians have come from Jordan to Jordan. It's actually not the case. They've come into the host communities. So they come into Amman or the suburbs or other cities here in this country. And that's posed a huge amount of challenges. As you can imagine, resources here aren't abundant, including water. So I think we're second or third most water scarce country on the planet. So you can imagine refugees pouring into Jordan, using the natural resources. There's lots of tensions there between the Jordanian communities, the already Palestinian refugees who have been here since 1948. And there's lots of tensions there, and figuring out how to serve those Syrians in a way that makes sure that they get what they need and also don't create those tensions. Again, one of the great programs we do here is remote education, both in the camps and as well in the host communities. And these teachers are wonderful. Let me just tell you one quick story here that I went to visit one of the shadow teachers, we call them. So let's say you're a Syrian family, you've come to Jordan, and your child has a disability, physical, mental, what have you. We supply a shadow teacher to help one-on-one those students. And I met a young woman who caught a virus. I won't go into too much detail, but she basically lost the use of her limbs. And she couldn't speak properly, but she was a star student back in Syria. Our teacher, using some of the kit that we gave her, an iPad, a wheelchair, she's now back learning along with her classmates at the same level. And COVID came along and obviously threw another spanner into the works. But again, this remote teacher is working through FaceTime and through Zoom to help that student every day still do the work. And it's pretty incredible to watch. It's actually heart-wrenching. I was watching one of the lessons the other day and it was really moving. So that's some of the work that happens in Jordan here. It's only a small part. But again, that remote education, now in the camps too, some of our education programs are having to go to the students, like from the classroom in the camp into the tent areas, because obviously we can't group people together even in the camp. So the challenges are immense, but the response again has been amazing. Just before we go to questions, let me skip over to Gaza. Many of you know Gaza Sky Geeks. It's a program, and if you don't, let me briefly describe it for you. I know that young woman, spent time at her house. I'll tell you about her in a second. She's an inspiration. But basically, it's a Gaza, as you know, is blocked off. There's a wall there. There really isn't the governance or the governments the young people need there responding specifically in their education programs. The tech programs really aren't very good in Gaza in the school system. So we saw an opportunity there several years ago, and we came in with a coding academy, working with Google and other partners and sponsors. And that's grown into an accelerator, startup accelerator, bringing in experts to come and help young people. And today we have young people now who have their own companies and who have their own online companies, making money independent of the government. And again, this is amazing because these are young people who before had no opportunities. Now they have businesses on their own. And you can imagine this is, again, and I'll say this across all the programming, which is really amazing. You're working with a local community that, like this young woman, you give her an opportunity and we show her the way, and she becomes a change agent. She doesn't really need a handout. She just needs a bit of support. And really, in this case, this is the kind of opportunity that most kids get in the West, to go to a tech school or to get to learn how to code or to start their own business. We have to remind ourselves that in Gaza, that just isn't possible. So when Gaza Sky Geeks came along, like this young woman took advantage. She started her own translation business and video editing business. And she then takes bids from around the world and does the work remotely. She gets paid by PayPal or online paying. She doesn't have to worry about traveling for business. She doesn't have to worry about the wall that is there. She's able now, and I know because I went to her house, she has two sisters and they each have kids. She's paying for their kids' education, and her father is unable to work. So she's supporting the whole family on her own. I went to her house and she works she said, from about midnight until 4 in the morning. And she does that. That's because that's when the request for proposals, the bids come online in Europe. That's the best time for her because they come on at that time, and she's able to first jump on them. And because there isn't a lot of power, she charges up her computer and she puts a candle on, and that's how she works from home, because of course there's only a certain amount of power a day in Gaza. But she's in a real inspiration of what Mercy Corps has created or helped build, because the Gaza Sky Geeks is an amazing example. When COVID-19 came along, these guys were experts at working at home and remote working and using Zoom and earning money online and not having to worry about meeting in groups, etc. So again, she's like a little investment, a flower that bloomed, and then it just has really helped all of these people, has a cascading effect of people in her community, her family, her kids are going to school. That's a next generation that will be able to be better educated, and on and on and on. So these are the kind of things that if you look across our programming, we've been able to respond because we work closely with the community, and we've been able to be reacting quite quickly, whether it's in Syria or our education programs in Jordan, or it's funding and supporting people who are resilient and building their own companies, their own opportunities, which then support their communities. And then we literally walk away and just watch their success flourish. So some really amazing work going on there in those 4 countries, a quick overview. But Matteo, I'll throw it back to you, and please feel free, anyone, to ask any questions about the countries that we work in. And again, we also have Lebanon and Yemen, in addition to Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and what did I miss? I think that's it. Yeah, those 6 countries. So Matteo.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was such a great journey and overview. I myself have put in there a question, but everyone, please feel free to drop in questions if you have any in the chat box, and Justina will help me with the Q&A. We're probably not going to answer every question if we see many come through, but we're always happy to get back to you via email if you get in touch with us. So yeah, feel free to drop us an email later on as well. Thank you. Justina, to you.
Thanks, Matteo. Wilf, I'm wondering if you could tell us more about whether Mercy Corps is planning to replicate the success of Gaza Sky Geeks in any other region or country.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it's something that we are working on. And I think right now we're trying to develop it across the Middle East. I will point to one program that's similar that was replicated, and that's the Youth Impact Labs. And it's here in Jordan. That's also in Kenya. But here in Jordan, I went and visited their startup accelerator building, and it's amazing what they've done. And here is the challenge with scaling the Gaza Sky Geeks. Every situation, every community in the Middle East is quite different, and they have different challenges. So here in Jordan, the challenge is the employment sector. So trying to get a job here is so difficult. I think somebody referred to it as tight is the best way to describe it. So if your uncle is a big shot, or you're a part of an important family, most likely if they own a big company or have access to a lot of money, you're probably going to get a good job. There isn't that meritocracy that's built in. And so it's very hard for people in rural areas or people that aren't wealthy or people that don't have connections or the family connections to break into the employment market. So we replicated the Gaza Sky Geeks model here, but we focused on apps, technology, small companies and ideas that would loosen up that market and make it possible for young people especially to find employment. Let me give you a few examples. They started something called Bilfron. Bilfron here is a home cooking app. Let's say you want home cooked food to deliver to your house. You can go on and choose a home chef somewhere in Jordan, and they're rated to cook you a meal and then deliver it to your house. Now, this might seem kind of obvious, but what we did is we helped work with the government of Jordan to change some of the rules around sanitation about cooking in your house and help them and those home cooks meet the sanitation goals for the ministry. And then we helped create a delivery service, and we helped support this company that had this idea. And now there are hundreds of home cooks who are delivering food, and that could be to a party, to an event, to a family dinner, or just to individuals. Now, what this does is this opens up opportunities for single moms, for women who might have trouble getting into the workforce, or it allows flexible employment, meaning that you can work any hours that you choose to work, and you're making money independently. And this is an amazing example of loosening up that thing. So that you don't need to work for or know someone in a company. It's a meritocracy. You can be an amazing cook, get ranked on this app, and the demands for this app are through the roof. I spoke to the owner, the guy that started it a couple of months ago, and he was telling me they have several hundred people cooking now on the app. They had 4,000 requests. So you can see the opportunity there, and that's just one of the apps that they've done. So we are scaling it, but they're looking at country per country, what the needs are in those countries and how to do it. I think yes, they're looking at Iraq and then across the Middle East, how they can do that. Hope that answers your question.
It's all really interesting, and it's so inspiring to see how much we innovate and we try to bring new solutions from technology to economic interventions into the areas that we work in. So
yeah. And one thing to add to all of this, I mean, it really, when you hear the description of the app, you're thinking, well, that's not all that complicated. And you're right, it's not complicated. Our teams do the heavy lifting. So they come in where there's an opportunity and they do some of the heavy lifting that probably nobody else would have done, like gone to the government in this case and said, listen, you can have people from the informal economic sphere contribute to your economy. They'll be less of a burden on the system. They'll put more cash into the economy. But here's where we need your help. We need your help to create home cooks. And home cooks are going to need to change the law around sanitation in the kitchen. We worked with the ministry to figure out what those were. We set those in place, and then away we went. And then we supported the app to do that. And so there's a bunch of examples for that and a bunch of apps that really are a testament to that kind of work. And so just with a little push, a little help, we've said goodbye to these people, and Bill Ferron is taking off. And let me also say, Bill Ferron, obviously, they have not been able to deliver home cooking because of COVID-19. They pivoted their business very quickly, and now they're doing deliveries like pharmaceutical deliveries or other deliveries that people might need to the elderly who haven't been able to leave their home. So again, another example of like a great company that we helped make sure was stable, was secure, could grow, give people jobs, and then again are resilient. When something like this happens, what do? They make a positive contribution in a time of crisis.
Thank you. Justina, do we have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah, I think so. So we've got another question here that is about how different genders are impacted by the crisis, especially, Wilf, you spoke earlier about how the programs are delivered and the information is delivered through head of households. And the question is around who those heads of households often are, and also how different genders are impacted by the crisis right now. But also, second part of the question, and I'll remind you about it at the end if needed as well, is whether the programs are delivered directly through Mercy Corps staff, or if Mercy Corps staff is training people in the countries to deliver the health information themselves.
Okay, so let me actually just jump on that latter part of the question. I can answer that quite easily. Again, really proud to be part of this team, because Mercy Corps, the vast majority of people are nationals when they work in the countries where they work in. Kind of a bad term, but you know, if you're Syrian, if we're working in Syria, the vast majority of our team are Syrians. And we've always, here at Mercy Corps, done that. So even though I'm Canadian, I'm based in Amman and I do comms, I'm really the exception. We have in Jordan here, the vast majority of people are Jordanian that work with us. So yes, they are, there's not much retraining that needs to happen because they're already doing it. They were always doing it. We don't have a lot of expats or internationals doing that kind of work. So I hope that answers that question. On the gender, absolutely, this really impacts gender in different ways. Let's take Syria. So for sure, the head of household, when it comes to cleaning, etc., is the woman, is the mom usually, and usually with a lot of children, and in a place that is very difficult. So you can imagine a household having 5 kids in a tent, not a lot of money, and not a lot of options, not sure what's next. So they don't know where they're going. So if we're talking northern Syria, they fled Idlib after December. They really don't know where their next meal is coming from. And I think, you know, one thing, I spoke to a program officer in Syria a couple of days ago when I asked about the coronavirus. They kind of said that, you know, it's just one more problem, because when you have to worry about making sure that your family can eat, that they've got shelter from rain, or in some cases recently snow and sleet, and they don't have enough money for petrol for their heaters. That's coronavirus is kind of like a far-flung, distant concern. So a lot of our work is going to the head of households and reminding them, yes, we understand you have, you know, these are the concerns that we can help you with, emergency assistance, but you also have to be aware of hygiene, and you have to be aware of making sure that you're social distancing and self-isolating when you can. So I think for the moms, it's incredibly stressful, but stressful in ways that maybe we haven't really considered. For the male, you know, the breadwinner, you can imagine, like everywhere else, economies have ground to a halt, and there isn't a lot of savings. There aren't nest eggs for a lot of these families, and this is the case in Jordan, in Iraq. People live hand to mouth, let alone week to week, month to month. So this is very scary for those two. So I think it's impacted both, but in very different ways. And finally, I'll say that, you know, there's these great COVID compensation packages coming from central governments in the West, America, the UK, where have you. don't have that in Syria. You know, we're trying our best to respond to emergency needs, but there aren't those great, huge packages or financial packages that are coming from international donors yet that we need in order to make sure that this doesn't spiral out of control. Because again, I think like the rest of the world, what COVID is doing is exasperating existing problems and accelerating the challenges. So we know what the problems are. They're just happening faster. And those problems are just getting worse faster. So again, there isn't the safety net there. So that's why we do need the help and as much assistance as we can get from everyone to allow our teams to help those both men and women that are being adversely affected by COVID-19.
Thank you, Wilf. I think we're unfortunately coming towards the end of the live stream now. Thank you very much for all your answers. If you have any more questions, please send them through to our emails or through our email address or anywhere else. You can find us on social media too. I want to thank everyone who participated and dedicated their time to join us today, to join the talk. It was great to have you, and I want to thank Justina and thank Wilf for making this possible today. It was really great to have you. And yeah, have a great day ahead, everyone. Thank you.